In a world where transparency is just an illusion and truth is buried beneath layers of secrecy, there are stories so chilling, so unnerving, that they've been hidden away by those in power. Governments sworn to protect their citizens have, at times, engaged in dark and disturbing cover-ups, concealing the sinister, the shocking, and the unspeakable. From covert operations to unsolved mysteries, these cover-ups reveal a reality that feels more like fiction. But the truth has a way of coming to light, and when it does, it forces us to question everything we thought we knew. In this series, we delve into the shadows of history, uncovering the most disturbing government cover-ups that will leave you questioning. What else might they be hiding? Omaha, Nebraska, 1988. At the heart of this narrative is the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union, a seemingly respectable financial institution. Its manager, Lawrence E. King Jr., otherwise known as Larry King, was a prominent figure in the community. Known for his extravagant lifestyle and political connections, King was seen as a rising star within the Republican Party. However, beneath the surface of this successful facade lay a web of corruption and, as alleged by many, something far more sinister. The scandal erupted when the Franklin Credit Union collapsed amidst accusations of embezzlement. King was accused of siphoning millions of dollars from the credit union, a financial crime that sent shockwaves through Omaha. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered disturbing allegations of child abuse and prostitution that implicated King and other prominent local and national figures. Several children came forward with shocking claims of being abused and exploited by influential and public figures. And worst of all, their claims were detailed and consistent, painting a picture of a dark and twisted world operating within the elite. Some of these allegations accused Larry King of using children from Boys Town, a nearby Catholic charitable institution for orphaned youth. The Catholic management denied any connection to King, yet financial records showed that Boys Town had a close-knit relationship to the Franklin Federal Credit Union. Nicholas O'Hara, a special agent in charge for the FBI in Nebraska and Iowa, said, "At this point, I'm satisfied there is no substance to the allegations as far as federal criminal statutes go. We are almost at the end of that point in the investigation." Omaha Police Chief Robert Wadman also concluded there is no substance to the allegations, stating, "Every step that should have been taken was taken." Chief Robert Wadman would, however, later confess that the Omaha Police Department never contacted Ulyss Washington, one of the first accusers. Wadman was also later identified as one of the abusers at King's parties by 4 different victims. Another vocal accuser was Alicia Owen, a young woman who claimed she had been abused and forced into prostitution. Her testimony was soon supported by others, including Paul Bonacci, whose detailed accounts of abuse further supported the claims. According to Bonacci, the abuse was not confined to Omaha. He described being transported to distant locations, including Washington, D.C., where he and other children were subjected to further abuse at elite parties attended by powerful individuals. These allegations were shocking, suggesting a widespread network of exploitation reaching into the most elite within society. In response to these disturbing claims, the Nebraska State Legislature formed a special committee to investigate, known as the Franklin Committee. They hired Gary Caradori, a private investigator with a reputation for thoroughness and integrity, to lead the probe. Caradori took his mission seriously, and he soon began to uncover evidence that appeared to support the allegations made by the victims. Caradori's investigation seemed to be gaining traction. He collected testimonies, documents, and photographs, that purportedly linked the abuse to prominent individuals, all of which he would keep in his briefcase, which was carried by him at all times. This led to him receiving multiple threats, including obvious tampering of his vehicle, someone breaking into his home, his phone being tapped. By 1990, Caradori was writing to Nebraska Secretary of State, Alan Bierman, writing, "My employees and myself have been followed and questionable situations have arisen during this investigation. Why? Am I too close to something they do not want to become public?" In July 1990, Caradori phoned Franklin Committee Chairman Loran Schmidt, claiming, "We've got them," explaining about some new evidence that had been developed. Caradori was with his son Andrew in Chicago for the All-Star Game, the weekend of July 7th to the 8th. Caradori had been conducting some investigating on the side, with the intention of reviewing the new evidence with the senator upon his return the following Wednesday, with Caradori claiming they now had the subjects of their investigation by the short hairs. On July 11, 1990, Caradori and his son boarded their plane, a Piper PA 34-200T Seneca II. Everything seemed fine, when suddenly, tragedy struck. The plane crashed in a field near Aurora, Illinois. Both Caradori and his son were killed. Understandably, the timing and circumstances of the crash immediately raised suspicions. Caradori had expressed concerns about being followed and had indicated that he believed his life was in danger. To many, the crash seemed far too coincidental. It occurred just as Caradori was about to present his findings, which could have blown the lid off the scandal and exposed the powerful figures involved. Was the crash an accident, or was it a deliberate act to silence Caradori and destroy the evidence he had gathered? To consider the latter would mean believing the idea that a massive cover-up was conducted by powerful individuals, potentially with the support of government agencies. The Franklin Committee continued its investigation despite Caradori's death. They presented their findings to 2 grand juries, one state and one federal. Both grand juries ultimately concluded that the allegations were a carefully crafted hoax. Alicia Owen, one of many who claimed she had been abused, was charged with perjury, convicted, and sentenced to prison. Lawrence King, meanwhile, was convicted of financial crimes related to the embezzlement, but never faced charges related to the abuse allegations. These conclusions did little to lower the suspicions of those who believed in the cover-up. In fact, the grand jury's dismissals and Owen's conviction only fueled the belief that a mass cover-up was made to bury the truth. Supporters of this theory point to several key factors that suggest a deliberate effort to suppress the investigation and protect those implicated. First, there is the mysterious and tragic death of Gary Caradori. His plane crash, occurring at such a critical moment in the investigation, is seen by many as more than just a tragic accident. Caradori had reportedly received threats and had confided in colleagues that he felt his life was in danger. An eyewitness account of the flash of light and explosion was on the early edition of television news in Nebraska, but was later on pulled from reports that said the plane exploded on impact. Following a 2-year investigation, the National Transportation Safety Board concluded that the crash was caused by structural failure of the aircraft's right wing. They returned all of Gary's belongings to his wife, Karen Ormiston, except for his briefcase. The contents of his briefcase always remained a secret to Caradori, ensuring it was always by his side and no one had access to it. Ormiston later stated, "We'll never know what else was missing, because I don't know what he had with him, or what he did in Chicago, what information he was coming back with." The whereabouts of the briefcase and the contents inside remains a mystery to this day. It could be argued that it may have been destroyed due to the plane crash, yet Ormiston and others believe the FBI had something to do with his briefcase being missing from the wreckage. Second, the treatment of the victims and witnesses raises serious questions. Alicia Owen, after bravely coming forward with her testimony, faced intense pressure to recant. She was ultimately convicted of perjury and sentenced to prison. her life forever altered by the ordeal. Paul Bonacci, despite providing detailed and consistent accounts of abuse, was largely discredited and dismissed as unreliable. His testimony, however, included specific details that were corroborated by other sources, making his dismissal all the more suspect. Third, there are numerous reports of witness intimidation and coercion. Victims and witnesses who came forward with their stories faced threats and harassment, creating an environment of fear and silence. These tactics, coupled with the high-profile nature of the individuals implicated, suggest a powerful motive to suppress the truth and protect those involved. Fourth, a multiple number of premature deaths in connection with the case. Some of these include Kathleen Sorensen, a woman who took in abused children and gave a report to a Christian television channel which aired in Nebraska in 1989, based on her experiences with over 30 abused foster children who spent months or even years in her home. In October of 1989, Kathleen was driving when another car, coming from the opposite direction, crossed and rammed into her car, killing her. Newt Koppel, a key behind-the-scenes activist fighting the cover-up of the Franklin case. He was an ex-champion wrestler with no prior health problems and parents who lived into their late 80s and 90s. He died suddenly in his sleep in March 1991 at the age of 70. Claire Howard, the former secretary of Alan Baer, one of the accused within the exploitation ring. She died in her sleep on the 20th of January 1991. Mike Lewis, a former caregiver for victim witness Loretta Smith. He died of a severe diabetic reaction at the age of 32. Joe Malik, an associate of Larry King and owner of Peony Park, which was used to organize exploitative events. He died on the 19th of November 1990 from a gunshot wound, which was ruled out to be a suicide. Bill Baker, a restaurant owner in Omaha and associated with Larry King. He was found dead from a gunshot wound in the back of the head on the 21st of December 1988. Aaron Owen, the brother of victim witness Alicia Owen. He was found hanged in his cell in Lincoln, Nebraska on the 9th of November 1990, hours before one of his sister's court appearances. Charlie Rogers, a supposed partner of Larry King. Rogers said that he feared for his life in the days before his death. Rogers was killed by a shotgun bullet to the head, which was later ruled as a suicide. Dan Ryan, another associate of Larry King. He was found dead of asphyxiation in a car on the 7th of December 1988, after disappearing 10 days earlier. Bill Skaleski, an Omaha police officer who was alleged to have been keeping a file on King. He died of a heart attack on the 17th of August 1989, at the age of 42. Curtis Tucker, a former Boys Town worker and supposed lover of King. He died when he fell out of the window of the Holiday Inn in Omaha on the 25th of December, 1985. Harmon Tucker, a supervisor of vocational education for the Council Bluffs School District. He was kidnapped and found dead on the 1st of November, 1988, from a shot in the head. And Sean Bonner, brother of victim witness Troy Bonner, who supposedly died of a gunshot wound from playing Russian roulette. Finally, the broader context of the time cannot be ignored. The Franklin case did not exist in isolation. It came at a time when other scandals and abuses of power were coming to light, creating a climate of distrust and skepticism towards institutions. This only makes the allegations of a cover-up more plausible to those who believe that powerful interests can and do manipulate the system to protect themselves. On the other hand of this all, this may just truly be one big conspiracy. Extensive investigations by law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, found no concrete evidence to substantiate the claims of a child exploitation ring. The FBI's investigation, led by Special Agent Michael Mott, concluded that the allegations were unfounded and that there was no credible evidence to support the existence of such a ring. The lack of tangible evidence, despite thorough investigations, is a significant point raised by skeptics. Additionally, the official investigation of the death of Gary Caradori concluded that the crash was an accident caused by mechanical failure. This conclusion is supported by aviation experts and the National Transportation Safety Board, who found no evidence of sabotage or foul play. Furthermore, the political and social climate of the 1980s and early 1990s played a role in shaping public perception of the allegations. The period was marked by the rise of the so-called satanic panic, a moral panic that swept across the United States, fueled by fears of satanic ritual abuse and child exploitation. This climate of fear and suspicion may have contributed to the willingness of some to believe in far-reaching conspiracies without sufficient evidence. The Franklin scandal, with its allegations of child abuse, high-level corruption, and potential cover-up, continues to intrigue and perplex those who seek the truth. It's a story that makes us question our understanding of power and justice, and raises significant questions about the lengths to which those in authority might go to protect themselves, as well as how complex it can be investigating such serious allegations. While some believe that the scandal represents a clear case of institutional betrayal and cover-up, others argue that the evidence does not substantiate the claims and that the allegations may have been fueled by hysteria and unreliable testimonies. The conflicting views highlight the difficulties in discerning the truth in cases involving powerful individuals and institutions. To this day, the Franklin scandal is one that really isn't spoken about, and surprisingly, not a lot of people know about it. It's one of those stories you really need to dive deep into in order to hear both sides of the story. The case remains a dark and unresolved chapter in American history, a tale of alleged horrors and unanswered questions that leaves us wondering, what really is the truth? In the early 1930s, as Japan embarked on a path of military expansion and imperial conquest, a secret biological and chemical warfare research unit was established under the command of General Shiro Ishii. Officially known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army, it would infamously be remembered as Unit 731. Located in the Pingfang district of Harbin, in the Japanese-occupied territory of Manchukuo, now known as modern-day China, Unit 731 became a sprawling complex dedicated to the development and testing of biological and chemical weapons. General Ishii, a microbiologist with grand ambitions, sought to create the most advanced and devastating weapons of mass destruction. Under his leadership, Unit 731 conducted a series of horrific experiments on prisoners of war and civilians, euphemistically referred to as logs by the Japanese personnel. Japan decided to build Unit 731 in Manchukuo because the occupation not only gave the Japanese an advantage of separating the research station from their island, but also gave them access to as many Chinese individuals as they wanted for use as test subjects. They viewed the Chinese as no-cost assets and hoped this would give them a competitive advantage in biological warfare. As well as Chinese civilians, the prisoners subjected to these experiments included political dissidents, Soviet prisoners of war, and even some Allied prisoners. The conditions in which they were held were abysmal, and they were treated with extreme brutality. The experiments conducted by Unit 731 were among the most barbaric in history, violating every conceivable ethical standard and inflicting untold suffering on the victims. Prisoners were deliberately infected with deadly pathogens, such as the bubonic plague, anthrax, cholera, and typhus. The victims were then observed as the diseases progressed, with researchers documenting the effects on their bodies in meticulous detail. These gruesome experiments often involved vivisection, where prisoners were dissected alive without anesthesia, so that the effects of the diseases could be studied in real time. Those who didn't die from infection were euthanized for autopsy analysis, using either potassium cyanide or chloroform to kill any survivors. Nakagawa Yonezo was a retired professor at Osaka University who studied at Kyoto University during the war. While he was there, he watched footage of human experiments and executions from Unit 731, stating, "Some of the experiments had nothing to do with advancing the capability of germ warfare or of medicine. There is such a thing as professional curiosity. What would happen if we did such and such? What medical purpose was served by performing and studying beheadings? None at all. That was just playing around. Professional people too like to play." The horrors didn't end there. Unit 731 also conducted a variety of other experiments designed to test the limits of human endurance and the effectiveness of chemical weapons. Prisoners were subjected to extreme temperatures, with some being frozen to study frostbite, while others were burned to test the effects of incendiary bombs. They were also exposed to lethal doses of chemical agents such as mustard gas and phosgene to determine the most effective methods of deployment and to develop antidotes. The depravity of Unit 731's experiments is difficult to comprehend. For example, some prisoners were forced to ingest poisons or were injected with animal blood to study the effects. Others were deprived of food and water to observe the physiological changes resulting from starvation and dehydration. Pregnant women were also subjected to experiments, with forced abortions conducted to study the effects on the body. Arguably the worst of all, however, was vivisection. Vivisection is the practice conducted for experimental purposes on a living organism, without any anesthesia. This was done to study the operations and limitations of the human body. Thousands of men and women, as well as children and elderly farmers, would have their organs removed for examination, with some having their limbs amputated and reattached to the other side of the body. Some prisoners had their limbs crushed or frozen, or would have the circulation cut off entirely to observe the progress of gangrene. The scale of the atrocities committed by Unit 731 is staggering. Estimates vary as to how many were killed. Between 1936 to 1945, roughly 14,000 victims were killed in Unit 731, with estimates stating that at least 300,000 individuals had died due to infectious diseases. The true number may never be known, as many records were destroyed by the Japanese in an attempt to cover up their crimes as World War II drew to a close. However, the testimonies of former personnel, as well as the physical evidence uncovered at the site, provide a chilling glimpse into the extent of the horrors. As the war came to an end and Japan faced defeat, Unit 731 attempted to destroy all evidence of their activities. Buildings were demolished, documents were burned, and surviving prisoners were executed to prevent them from revealing what had transpired. None of the captives assigned to Unit 731 survived their confinement. However, the atrocities of Unit 731 did not remain hidden forever. General Ishii and his staff sought to evade responsibility for their crimes, and many fled back to Japan. In the aftermath of the war, however, the Allies conducted extensive investigations into Japanese war crimes. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East, also known as the Tokyo Trials, was established to prosecute those responsible for wartime atrocities. Yet, remarkably, the leaders of Unit 731 were not among those tried and convicted. Both the Soviet Union, as well as the United States, gathered data from the unit after the fall of Japan. While 12 of the researchers arrested by Soviet forces were tried at the December 1949 Khabarovsk war crime trials, they were sentenced lightly to the Siberian labor camps for 2 to 25 years in exchange for the information they held. Those captured by the US military were secretly given immunity, with the United States having helped cover up the human experiments and handed stipends to the perpetrators in exchange for the data. The deal allowed many of those involved in the horrific experiments to escape justice. General Shiro Ishii, the mastermind behind Unit 731, lived out the rest of his life in relative obscurity, dying of natural causes in 1959. Other key members of the unit went on to have successful careers in medicine, academia, and industry, their pasts hidden or overlooked. Despite the lack of official accountability, the horrors of Unit 731 have not been forgotten. Over the years, historians and human rights advocates have worked tirelessly to uncover the truth and ensure that the atrocities committed by Unit 731 are remembered. The Japanese government has faced criticism for its handling of the Unit 731 issue. While there have been acknowledgements of the atrocities, there has been no formal apology or comprehensive investigation by the government. This reluctance to fully confront the past has fueled tensions with neighbouring countries, particularly China and South Korea, where many of the victims came from. It's deeply troubling to discover that both the Soviet Union and the United States participated in covering up these atrocities to gain access to scientific data. On the 28th of August 2002, the Tokyo District Court ruled that Japan had committed biological warfare in China and therefore was responsible for the deaths of many residents. But to the frustration and disappointment of the victims and their families, it rejected claims for compensation on the grounds that all issues had been settled at a government level by international peace treaties. The victims are left without any justice, and unfortunately, this will be unlikely to change anytime soon. In recent years, efforts to preserve the memory of Unit 731 and educate future generations about its horrors have gained momentum. The former site of the complex in Harbin has been turned into a museum known as the Unit 731 Museum. The museum serves as a memorial to the victims and provides a stark reminder of the atrocities committed. It plays a crucial role in ensuring that the lessons of Unit 731 are never forgotten. This story has recently gained quite a lot of traction in the UK, with more news and information about the scandal coming to light every day, and so many people left without any true justice. Imagine a system so flawed that it ruins hundreds of lives, a corporation so determined to protect its reputation that it turns a blind eye to injustice, and a cover-up so extensive it takes 2 decades to uncover. This is the story of the Horizon IT scandal that rocked the British Post Office, involving systemic failure, wrongful accusations, and a fight for justice against overwhelming odds. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear is one of the most disturbing government cover-ups in recent history. For over 500 years, the British Post Office has been a pillar of British communities, a trusted institution delivering letters, parcels, and more recently, handling financial transactions. For many, becoming a post office sub-postmaster or sub-postmistress, which essentially was someone in charge of a main city or town post office, was a prestigious position, often viewed for their reliability and respect within the community. These local branches were often at the heart of small towns and villages, a place where people could not only send mail, but also access essential services. But in the late 1990s, the post office decided to modernise. They introduced a new IT system called Horizon, developed by the Japanese company Fujitsu. This system was meant to streamline operations, manage accounts, and handle transactions more efficiently. Sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses were told that Horizon would make their jobs easier and more accurate. Little did they know, this new system was about to become a nightmare, leading to one of the biggest horrors of justice in British history. Horizon was rolled out across the post office network starting in 1999. Almost immediately, some sub-postmasters began to notice discrepancies in their accounts. These weren't minor errors that could be easily explained away. We're talking about substantial sums of money, thousands of pounds, appearing to go missing. When these discrepancies were reported to the post office, the response was dismissive. Sub-postmasters were told that Horizon was reliable and that any shortfalls must be due to their own mistakes, or worse, theft. The post office's stance was clear. Horizon couldn't be wrong. The sub-postmasters, therefore, must be. What followed was a wave of accusations and prosecutions. Between 2000 and 2014, more than 700 sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses were prosecuted by the post office for theft, fraud, and false accounting. These individuals, who had devoted their lives to their communities, found themselves accused of serious crimes. Imagine the horror. You're running a local post office, a trusted figure in your community, and suddenly you're being accused of stealing thousands of pounds. Your reputation is shattered, your livelihood destroyed, and you're facing possible imprisonment, all because of a computer system error that you had no control over. Many of those accused felt they had no choice but to plead guilty, often under immense pressure and facing the threat of lengthy prison sentences if they fought the charges. Others who maintained their innocence were convicted after trials that heavily relied on the infallibility of the Horizon system. The impact on those accused was devastating. Some were sent to prison, their lives ruined. Families were torn apart, homes were lost, and careers were ruined. The social stigma attached to being labelled a thief or fraudster added to the emotional toll of it all. One tragic case is that of Martin Griffiths, a sub-postmaster who was accused of stealing £60,000. Despite his protestations of innocence, the pressure and shame were too much to bear. Martin took his own life in 2013, leaving behind a grieving family and a community in shock. Unfortunately, his story isn't an isolated incident. Many others faced severe mental health issues, financial ruin, and irreparable damage to their reputations. The human cost of the post office's blind faith in the Horizon system was immense, as they continued to press charges and blame the postmasters for their wrongdoings. Despite the post office's insistence that Horizon was faultless, doubts began to surface. Whistleblowers, including former post office employees and IT experts, started to speak out. They pointed to evidence of systemic issues within Horizon, glitches, bugs, and flaws that could easily lead to accounting discrepancies. Campaigners and journalists also began to investigate, uncovering a pattern of errors that suggested the problems were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader issue with the Horizon system itself. Yet, the post office continued onward, denying any fault and continuing to prosecute sub-postmasters. As the evidence mounted, it became increasingly clear that the post office, with the approval of the government, was engaged in an incredibly massive cover-up to protect themselves. Internal documents later revealed that senior executives were aware of the problems with Horizon, but chose to suppress this information. They feared the financial and reputational damage that admitting fault would cause. The government, which was responsible for the oversight of the post office, was complicit in this deception. Reports surfaced of meetings where officials discussed strategies to deflect blame from the system and onto the sub-postmasters. Legal advice was sought to ensure that the prosecutions could continue despite the known issues with Horizon. This cover-up extended to manipulating evidence, withholding crucial information from the defense, and presenting the system as infallible in court. Take the case of Seema Misra, a pregnant sub-postmistress accused of stealing £74,000. Despite her protests and evidence of Horizon's errors, she was prosecuted and sent to prison. During her trial, the post office withheld documents that would have supported her defense. It wasn't until years later that these documents came to light, revealing the extent of the post office's and government's desperation to cover up the truth. Another example is the story of Alan Bates, who had been fighting for justice since 2000. Bates discovered internal emails indicating that post office executives knew about Horizon's flaws but continued to prosecute sub-postmasters to protect their reputations and careers. These revelations were crucial in exposing the depth of the cover-up and bringing the issue to public attention. Determined to clear their names, a group of sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses began to band together. They formed the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance and started a legal battle against the post office. Their goal was to prove that Horizon was flawed and that they had been wrongfully accused. The legal fight was long and tedious, spanning several years and involving multiple court cases. But these individuals were relentless. They knew their reputations, their lives, and their futures depended on uncovering the truth. The turning point came in 2019 when a High Court judge finally delivered a damning verdict against the post office. In a landmark ruling, the judge found that Horizon was not remotely robust, highlighting its numerous faults and flaws. The court concluded that the post office had wrongfully prosecuted sub-postmasters based on unreliable data from the Horizon system. This ruling was a monumental victory for the sub-postmasters, proving their claims and exposing the extent of the post office's failings. The judge's findings were quite harsh, criticizing the post office for its oppressive behavior and refusal to admit the possibility of errors within Horizon. Following the High Court ruling, the post office agreed to settle with the group of sub-postmasters, paying £58 million in compensation, a large amount of money, until legal fees were deducted. The battle between the postmasters and the post office spanned years of court cases, with each of these needing to be paid for somehow. This left the postmasters, as well as their families, not only emotionally battered and bruised, but also left with nothing to show for it. Families were broken, houses sold to cover financial costs, and lives were taken, all because of the post office's refusal to acknowledge the flaws in the Horizon system and the government's support in covering this all up. The Horizon IT scandal serves as a grim reminder of how systemic failures and government cover-ups can devastate lives. For over a decade, sub-postmasters were wrongfully accused, prosecuted, and imprisoned due to a faulty computer system. The unwavering defence of Horizon by the UK Post Office and the government only prolonged the suffering of those affected. It was the courage of the sub-postmasters, the persistence of investigative journalists, and the eventual legal battles that brought this scandal to light. The convictions were overturned, and justice began to prevail, but the damage had already been done. The Horizon IT scandal is still an ongoing case to this day, with 844 prosecutions brought between 2000 and 2015, 705 criminal convictions secured by the Post Office, with 93 of those convictions having since been overturned, and 63 claims having not yet been fully settled by the Post Office. This scandal isn't just about a faulty IT system, it's about the failure of an institution to not only protect its people, but in the importance of accountability and doing what's right. Lives were not only forever changed by this scandal, but some were even taken too. With the ongoing cases happening on this scandal today, we can only hope that the postmasters and families of those involved will one day receive the justice they truly deserve.